They say when you wear Black Power Media gear, you can accomplish anything. You play any and every position. Coaching, to kicking, to receiving, to running and juking. And, oh my goodness, I see that again in slow motion. Get off me. And you're going to have a lot of haters coming at you, but what you got to do is you got to shake them off and get to your goal and accomplish it. And when that's done, it's a beautiful thing. I'm talking about going hard, extra, for that extra point. And when it's done beautifully, you talking about touchdown. Oh, and the crowd goes wild and they're celebrating with you and everything. Man, let's see that again. Nice.
Black Power Media, baby. That's how we do it.
Now go to blackpowermedia.org and get you some of that gear. Empower yourself today. Yeah.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Yes, indeed. Welcome back to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here at Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Very happy to be your host. Before we get started, please do like, share, subscribe, invite others to join you. For those who are making it to this live, for those who will see and hear this later, put it in your socials, invite others to check it out with you after the fact. Please do be in touch with blackpowermedia.org, where we're inviting people to make sure they're subscribed and following everything so you don't miss all that is produced and all the ways to support the platform and all the good work happening here. So please do sign up there as well. And by the way, for those with suggestions and show proposals and criticisms, there's all kinds of forms and way to communicate that to us there as well. Otherwise, just continue to
put it in the comments.
All right. So back with us to discuss to start as a discussion point using the fifth and final episode of Dear Mama, FX Network's series on Tupac and Afeni Shakur. We are privileged to be joined by Dhoruba bin Wahad, formerly of the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army, political prisoner, and certainly one of, if not my favorite political theorist, philosopher, organizer, and spokesperson. So welcome back again, Dhoruba, to the program. It's always a pleasure and privilege to have you back. Welcome once again. I think you're muted.
Yeah. Thank you, Jared.
Go. There you go. So, having stumbled through that intro, let me just say this real quick. Talking about this last episode, there's not much there in terms of where I know we would like to go, but just to sort of catch you up, and something that I do think is increasingly important to consider as we reflect on this series and the like. The book, the series clarifies a little bit more that a lot of its maybe source material or point of view or perspective comes from the book that I mentioned in a previous episode about Afeni Shakur by Jasmine Guy, which to me is fine if you want a book about Afeni, if you want to hear, Afeni in a conversation and reflecting on her life and her work. But it's not particularly helpful if you're looking to that book for an exegesis of sorts on the history of the Black Panther Party or revolutionary struggle, radical politics. The book makes no mention of socialism, the BLA, communism. It mentions capitalism only once. It's not about any of these politics and histories, but yet it does passingly, I think, disparage, as we've talked about before, much of the actions taken and the people involved, Dhoruba in particular. The series quickly moves on to Tupac being, it quickly mentions something that they should have spent more time focused on, one of the many things, which is when Tupac expresses his interest in leaving death row and wanting his masters back from Suge Knight, him firing David Kenner, the attorney who has his own very awkward relationships with many entities, state related entities, and none of this is really followed up on. They just make mention of this, and then they give a moment, oddly, for Eminem to reflect on someone he never met, but Afeni decided to give his, some acapellas too, so that Eminem could make an album about, with. And he gets to pontificate about the importance of Tupac, which is, irritating to some of us. The Black Panther Party is mentioned only passingly by Snoop, and made once in reference to in passing by Pac in an old interview. The music industry is left basically to be seen as largely a good thing. Suge Knight, maybe not so much. David Kenner, maybe not so much. Death Row, maybe not so much. But the industry itself is left largely blameless and given credit for the 50-acre farm that Tupac is able to buy his mother. And then it largely ends with a moving tribute to Pac as an artist and a man, and Afeni as a woman and the mother of Pac. And then that's it. And even if you're a Pac fan, I think you would have to be highly critical of what is left unsaid about Pac's meaning to radical transformations, to radical movements, to a critical approach to hip hop. We don't get to see prominently displayed very much anymore, but that's it. So I leave it to you, Dhoruba, to there's a couple places we could go, but I'll let you decide how you would want to start, maybe with a departure from what I described back to what I wanted you to be on here specifically to talk about, which was what I was hoping would be a constant back and forth reference and discussion of Afeni's relationship to the Panthers, to the New York 21 and radical politics, but there's less of it than I even would have suspected. So I'll leave it there for now.
Well, thanks for Jared. I was looking forward to going over some of the minutiae of the Panther 21 case.
Okay.
And the surrounding events and problems that we face. I know you just mentioned a person by the name of David Kenner. Was he any relation to Marty Kenner?
That is a very good question.
I would like to know that. Maybe it's just a coincidence, because you know who Marty Kenner was. Marty Kenner handled the financial affairs of the Panther 21 Defense Committee.
Hold on, that would be wild.
And he was.
Yeah, go ahead.
And he was taken out to the West Coast by Hilliard and the leadership to make sure that they can maintain control, financial control over the Panther 21 Defense Committee's financial flow and their books. So that's why when you said David Kenner.
Does anybody in the chat happen to know an answer to this question? I'm going to quickly try to look it up, but I don't want to be too distracted from what you're saying.
Okay, yeah, that was just curiosity,
because that would be.
Yeah,
I bet Potash would be on this. John Potash's work would cover this, but go ahead. I mean,
I just mentioned it because the whole the whole aftermath of the Panther 21's arrest, the immediate aftermath. Why is my screen keeps going dark? The immediate aftermath of
Nothing's changing on this end.
I know, but it's like my screen is going to sleep. Maybe I got it set wrong. But yeah, because there was because you remember I recounted how I was visited in prison by David Hilliard right a few days after the 21 were arrested, and it was splashed all over the national newspapers. Panthers conspire, Easter plot to bomb department stores and subways and all of this stuff, you know. And David has said that he had wanted to. The Central Committee was considering shutting down the New York chapter because it was so heavily infiltrated, and I vehemently opposed that. And I asked him, or I tried to prevail upon him to consider the fact that Harlem and New York was central to Black people, not only as a cultural center, art center, but also in terms of progressive Black politics and Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. And so he said he would take it under consideration, and they went up to New Haven, and the rest was kind of like history. Bobby was indicted in New Haven for the murder of Alex Rackley, who, by the way, was not an informant. He was autistic, and he used to hang around the office. And because he used to love to party and he used to hang around the office trying to make himself useful, you know, we used to let him hang out. And he would sweep and clean and make sure everything was cool, put stuff away, just to hang out, you know. And he was a really good spirit, good guy. But he was autistic. And so when we were busted, these folks that came into New York from out of New York, Alex Rackley, you know, was talking a lot about Lumumba and the Panthers who were in Harlem, because he really loved us, you know, with the way we treated. So he talked a lot. He was autistic. He just talked. And these knuckleheads, these knuckleheads took the boy up to New Haven. And when Bobby came up there with David, they had him down in the basement in the Panther headquarters, torturing him, talking about he was the main informant on the Panther 21 and all of this shit. And the person that set this up was actually an FBI informant who went from chapter to chapter, causing chaos and having the police raid the chapters. He was eventually exposed, but not until after he's done a considerable amount of damage. And although I can't remember this guy's name, I'm quite sure and I'm quite sure that he when Bobby came downstairs to this knucklehead said that they found the major witness. He confessed to snitching on the 21, and he went down to the basement or wherever, and they had Rackley there bound and gagged and tortured him. And Bobby said, well, you know, he didn't really know what was going on. He didn't really have anything to do with it. You see what I'm saying? He was relying upon the command structure, the structure of the party, to the security sections, the security people in the party, you know, to suss out whatever agents they could. So he just left. And Alex Rackley was murdered, thrown into the, I think he was thrown into a river or a dump or something. I forgot what it was. And Bobby, when the Panthers who were doing it, one of the one that perpetrated it escaped. But the Panthers in New Haven, a few of them were arrested for murder, conspiracy to commit murder. And Bobby Seale was one of those who was indicted for that. And so he was brought to New Haven to stand trial, and the Panther Party had to change its strategic plans on freeing political prisoners, especially Huey, at that time to get the chairman out of prison, to defend the chairman of the Black Panther Party. So that meant we had to send cadres to New Haven. We had to build up the New Haven chapter. We had to got a printing machine sent up there so that we could print out our own leaflets. We had to, we really had to up our game to build a presence in New Haven to save the chairman. And everything on the East Coast revolved around saving the chairman. But it was the Black Panther Party's Panther 21 case that had garnered the initial attention and support from liberal whites, progressive blacks, clergy, creative personalities in New York, who all flocked to support the Panther 21. Eleanor Holmes Norton was on the defense committee. Who else? Charlene Mitchell of the Communist Party. I can't remember everybody, but Leonard Bernstein gave a cocktail party to raise money to support the Panther 21. And so there was a lot of white liberal support for the Panther 21, and it was the strategy of the Black Panther Party to build a strong presence of the party on the East Coast in order to bring that strength to bear in freeing Bobby, getting Bobby acquitted. And although at that time, while it was happening, I didn't really oppose such a strategy because he was the chairman of the Black Panther Party. It wasn't like he was just a community worker. It wasn't like he was just a community worker like Shaka Khan or Angela Davis or something. He was the chairman of the Black Panther Party, co-founder. So I didn't really disagree with that strategy, but I thought that strategy would encompass building the momentum around the 21 so that it would carry over to New Haven. Because ours was a conspiracy case that had no real evidence other than undercover informants. Whereas Bobby's case actually was a murder charge and had a body and an informer and co-defendants for conspiracy to actually commit this murder. So it was a qualitatively, legally, and legal differentiation between Bobby Seale's case in New Haven and ours. And Bobby was from the West Coast, so he had no real community roots in New Haven. So what I'm trying to say is that after the 21 was arrested, there were a lot of things that happened that began to add to the counterintelligence program's effectiveness in dividing the party ideologically. We must understand that the division in the Black Panther Party had nothing to do with egos. It wasn't about, I'm numero uno, or we better than you, or we need to do this, or we need to that. It wasn't even about that. And it wasn't about personal likes or dislikes for individuals. It was never about that. The Black Panther Party held to the principle of criticism and self-criticism. And that if you didn't accept a criticism that was accurate, that was effective, that was truthful, then you were the one that was being reactionary. You were the one that was being counter-revolutionary. So criticism was always a part and parcel of the Black Panther Party's a modality of operation. And you had to accept criticisms, and the principle of the party also was democratic centralism. In other words, we all had a right to speak our minds. We all had a right to add or subtract or comment on a particular policy. But once all of that those democratic voices was heard, then it was up to the Central Committee to lay the path and create what we call the mass line and the party line. And the mass line and the party line in the Black Panther Party were two different things, although they were both intricately related. The mass line was what the Black Panther Party projected to the community and the masses as the party's position, and that was usually around a 10-point program, and it usually meant that the Panther Party put out a strategy. We would put out a strategy that we felt the community should work around, and we would get out in the community and try to work and bring that strategy to fruition. One of those strategies, of course, was the decentralization of the police, the control of public safety, community control of public safety. Another one was the establishment of our free health clinics. Also, later on, the free breakfast program. And later on, still, we had other programs dealing with tenants. We had a whole struggle with the racist Zionist United Federation of Teachers, who went on strike in the winter of, I believe it was the winter of '69. And they went on strike because of a beef with Ocean Hill-Brownsville, which was an experimental decentralized educational district that was predominantly Black in Ocean Hill-Brownsville, Brooklyn. And Roddy McDowell was an administrator there. Some of the folks, J2 Weusi, who founded the East, was also an educator in that struggle. And the Black Panther Party, of course, in unity with the Black community struggling for a better education. One of our points is we want an education that teaches us our true role in history, teaches us who we are, and so we were all in supporting the Ocean Hill-Brownsville struggle. So when they went out on strike and closed the schools, the Black Panther Party in New York and Harlem especially carried out a program of reopening the schools. Some of us had, pre-political day skill sets, like breaking into buildings, burglary. Some of us had that little skill set. So we managed to open up a few schools, and we tried to recruit students from up at Columbia University to do workshops, to do little classes for elementary school students, teaching them reading, writing, and arithmetic and stuff. And we had convinced the janitors union, to make the public schools accessible to the public during the strike. Of course, the UFT had no control over the public schools opening and closing physically, you see. So they managed to prevail upon the mayor's office. I think Lindsay was the mayor then. I think it was Lindsay. And they prevailed upon him, the mayor's office, to have the police intervene to keep the schools closed, post police guards outside the schools. And so usually, in the Black community in the hood, in the neighborhood, usually public schools were open in the evening as community centers, where kids could go play basketball, ping pong, and all of those, those things. But they didn't do that no more during the strike. And it was during this particular strike that we confronted, I first got familiar with Benjamin Netanyahu, who was then Maya Kahani's right-hand man with the Jewish Defense League, who, of course, sided with the UFT. I don't think I even had to say that part, right? So they sided.
I don't think I knew Netanyahu and Kahane, whatever his name. I didn't know he worked with that dude.
Kahane was his mentor.
I didn't know that.
Kahane founded that party they got. What's the name of that party? The Likud? Is it
Likud? Yeah.
That's Netanyahu's party. That's his.
I just don't. Yeah.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. Well, Maya Kahane was a real Zionist, racist dog. So it fits the his profile that his protege, you understand, is also a mutt.
And the same perspective on violence and the
That's right.
monopoly of violence. Yep.
That's right. Monopoly, and they got a state.
Mm-hmm.
They got a state, and that state and its intelligence agencies and its military is supported. And in fact, it's an adjunct of the United States military for all intents and purposes. The Zionist state, the European settler state of Israel, some of the U.S. Military's most advanced equipment, which is not, sold or gave to any other states, often is tested and sent to Israel, and to be used, of course, against the Palestinians and other people in the region. But I didn't want to digress. I just wanted to say that that all of these things were the prelude to the Panther 21 arrests. Okay, because right there, when we were struggling against the educational system in New York, in conjunction with Ocean Hill-Brownsville, a community board, at that same time, you had Jesse Gray in New York, who was leading a massive tenants strike and struggle. And in fact, that struggle led by Jesse Gray back in the late 60s, early 70s, that resulted in rent control laws being passed in New York. So landlords couldn't kick people out of an apartment and then jack up the price, make it unreasonable. Also, absentee landlords were liable to having their property seized by the tenants. All of these things came out of the tenant strike at that time. And of course, you have Black workers organizing all over the country, in Detroit, in Chicago, in New York. You had H-Room in Detroit. So this was a very volatile time, and the government was faced with all of these struggles, these grassroots struggles. And there was the Black Panther Party, and these were guys with guns. You see, Jesse Gray had no guns. You see, Roddy McDowell and Ocean Hill-Brownsville, they weren't armed, you see, but we were. And we felt it was very important to protect and to defend and to advance the struggles of our people in these areas. So we played a role in that. In fact, one of the counts for the indictment in the Panther 21 case was a count against Sekou Odinga. I believe it was for a so-called ambush in Brooklyn of a unified patrol of the JDL and the police. And so I think that was one of them. Maybe that came later. But anyway, I just wanted to say that all of these things were happening prior to the Panther 21 case. So when the police infiltrated the party at its inception in New York, you had snitches that were snitching on snitches. You had agents that was reporting. You had federal agents reporting on state agents, not knowing the Fed that they were federal agents. And so the FBI and the NYPD and Bossy sat down one day. It's in the files. They sat down one day and say, look, this is healthy competition, but we got to be able to manage this because we reporting activities of this particular individual who seems to be, vociferously violent. Come to find out, he's your agent. You see what I'm saying? So you're making it difficult. So they sorted that out, and in sorting it out came the Panther 21 indictment. That was actually, you had the Brooklyn DA, I believe his name was Aaron Cooter at that time, who was vying with the Manhattan DA, Hogan, for the mantle of the legal gray-haired wizard, white-haired wizard of New York, of the New York Bar Association. Hogan was this venerated prosecutor. He had went after the mob. He had did all of these things. He's been in office for like 45, 50 years, some absurd. And Aaron Cooter, who was a little younger, who was in Brooklyn, he was always trying to outdo him, upstage him. So Brooklyn was initially started the investigation that led to the 21 indictment. Because there was a police were shot in Brooklyn after a run-in, after the Panther 20, after the we had a brawl. I don't even want to call it a brawl because we didn't come out too tough with it. But when two Panthers were arrested in Brooklyn, in fact, this was the day I joined the Black Panther Party, which was ironic. That's in my book. I'm gonna say that for my book. But anyway, these two brothers who were on the Bullhorn in Bed-Stuy, running down the Panther program in the summer of 68, I think, 67, 68, 67. Anyway, they were out in front of the Panther office in Brooklyn on a Bullhorn. They were attacked by several cops in a squad car and dragged away. And an instant demonstration popped up where masses of people marched to the local police station led by Sonny Abubadika Carson. That's the first time I met Sonny Carson, actually, was at that demonstration. And Sonny was on some serious activist shit. So, and all the police knew that. So when we all got to the police station, they summoned Sonny and entourage into the station to see that the two brothers hadn't gotten beaten up, that they were okay, that the crowd outside should go away. They're going to get a rain tonight, that evening, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what happened. That evening, though, we were attacked by this group called the Law Enforcement something. They were basically Klansmen in blue, and they were off duty. And so when we went to the courthouse for the arraignment of these two brothers who were arrested earlier in the day, there were, a considerable amount of us, maybe 30, 40. And when we got to the courthouse was surrounded by this police group called Law Enforcement Group or something, Lagos, I forgot.
Yeah, wasn't this in those documents?
Everything is in the document
that Bob sent. I think that group, that sounds familiar. But it's like some group within some like unofficial group of cops within the police.
It was a right wing subgroup in the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. So you got to remember, this is the period right after King's assassination. This is a period when every summer the cities were going up in smoke. They used to call them hot summers. This was the period when Black people were rising up all across the country, clamoring for their rights as citizens, their rights as human beings. Malcolm had been assassinated. We had militant organizations that were coming up. So this was a period of heightened struggle and heightened intensity, and the police realized that they were being out-organized, that the masses of people didn't really like their ass, didn't really feel any type of affinity with them. So they embarked on a whole strategy to win over the Black community, and this went against the right-wing racist politics of those in the police department who felt they were coddling Black people, they were soft on crime, and that these militants that were calling policemen pigs, you understand, had to be put in check. So they formed this law enforcement group called LEG, I forgot what it was. And they came in mufti, in civilian clothes, to the arraignment. And as we were exiting the arraignment, they pounced on us. And the police who were on duty just turned their back and dropped their nightsticks on the ground and just turned their backs. So these crackers went to whipping on our asses, and one thing led to another. And the chairman of the New York party, David Brothers, had a briefcase with him, and in that briefcase were party documents and party papers outlining our strategy for community control of police, different organizationals that we were working with, all that stuff. He was the chairman, and they snatched his bag and they turned it over to the FBI. And some of those documents that you will read are the results of their perusal of these papers from the Black Panther Party. So that was part of the conspiracy theories that they managed to mold into an indictment. Okay. And of course, when the indictment jumped off, when the arrest jumped off, and they raided our houses and rounded us up. I think it was on April 2nd or April 1st. They rounded us all up. They didn't have no evidence really to substantiate a wide-ranging plot for Easter Sunday to destroy department stores, to plant bombs in subways, to do all of these things. There was no real physical evidence to indicate we was even planning to do something like that. The only physical evidence that they had was actually dynamite that they had. It wasn't really dynamite. It was false dynamite that they planted in Ellesmere Tenants Association, where Lumumba Shakur was the director. And this was a tenants association in the Bronx. And they planted this. Ralph White, the police detective, brought this cache of so-called explosives and stashed them in Ellesmere. So when the bus went down, these phony explosives, the story behind them was that our use of these explosives was imminent, and that Bossy had to do something, and that Ralph White took the original, real dynamite and replaced it with false dynamite so that no one would get hurt if we tried to carry out the plot that they said we were plotting. So all these intrigues were swirling around the party. At the same time, the personal, and the personal being political, adjustment of some of us to our roles in the party, our face-to-face relationship with the community began to be tested, and how we would deal with that. And enters Afeni Shakur, and that whole line of storyline. I don't want to call it. It's not something that's bogus. It's not something that I think is shameful. In fact, quite the opposite. But I think there are facts and innuendos and things that people don't really know about. And so when we try to recount these events, we always recount them in a subjective way, myself included. We all recount these things in a subjective way, but there is an underlying existential set of facts. Whether we want to relate to them or not, there's an underlying set of facts. And so that's one of the reasons why I said I really didn't want to watch this movie, because there's an underlying set of facts, and I knew it was going
because again, but to your point about the subjectivity of it is that, and this is why I did want to do. Again, as I said, any excuse to get you on here, I'm looking for it. But the subjectivity of the production companies and their ownership and their interests is I think, particularly in this last episode, importantly on display, pun intended, and it goes unchecked. And from their perspective, their interests in this history is tangential at best, and they're only interested in it to the extent that it relates to the story they wanted to tell about Tupac. Again, going in the opposite direction, I'm only interested. Well, I'm not interested in Pac's story. I don't want to suggest that, but I'm mostly interested in the other direction of what was happening with what was only somewhat passingly referenced in the 21 and the Panther Party and all of that. So some of that context, and I can't remember, was it in one of our discussions that Donald Cox's work came up, or was this specifically in response to but I did get and start reading his
book, DC's book.
Yeah. And I read specifically, and I shout out to whoever told me to do this first, but well, actually I did it second, but I read the chapter, The Split in particular, where he talks about the split, and in detail, at least I don't remember getting before, what he thinks happened in terms of the violence, the I think 4 killings in particular that he mentions, Sam Napier prominently among them, and I am wondering what Robert Webb, and then Spiegler, the lawyer, the white or Jewish ally.
Yeah.
And I'll find the other name, or maybe somebody in the chat will remind, or maybe you'll remember. But do you remember Cox's version, and do you have any thoughts about Cox's version?
Well, it's really strange that you mentioned that, because now that you, when I got out of prison, right? When I got, let me start from the beginning. When Eldridge first came to New York, he came to New York with DC, and DC was the field marshal of the Black Panther Party, the first field marshal of the Black Panther Party. And later on, there was another field marshal of the Black Panther Party who was in SNCC, who was really close with Stokely, with I think his last name was Nesbitt. Yeah, Nesbitt. His wife lives in Africa now. I think she's in Ghana. And he was the second field secretary. It was the East-West Coast, but DC was the main man on the Central Committee. He was a deputy field secretary, this brother Nesbitt. And so when Eldridge first came to New York, DC was with him, and I managed to DC went underground and into Exile. I know I'm jumping ahead, but when I got out of prison, I went to Germany on a speaking tour. So I went to Frankfurt, Mannheim, all these 4 or 5 different German cities. And I rented a car in where was it? The port city. I'm getting Alzheimer's up in this piece. And I drove from Germany down to southern France, where DC was. And I drove all through these mountains and stuff and get to this spot near Perpignan on the border with Spain. And I pull up at DC spot. Right? This dude couldn't believe this shit. And so I pulled up at this spot, and I got this, I rented this car. This was back then. What was this, 1990? Yes, 1990. Yeah. Because I just got out of prison. So it was 1990. It was before I went to Cuba to visit Asada. Yeah. It was before I went to Cuba. Was it? Yeah, I think. Bob will definitely know. He's my go-to man. He's my Alzheimer's researcher. Anyway, so I pull up. Now DC was in exile, and for years he was in exile, and his status was, because when everything broke up in Algiers, everybody went different ways. Setaway went towards South Africa. Some of the brothers went to France. Some of the brothers went out to other places, right? And the brothers that went to France, at first, they didn't have asylum status. They didn't have no political, persecution status. And it took them years to get that, you see. And one of my reasons, well, of course, which is in my book, and I'll go into more detail, for visiting DC is because my case was pending. And they were trying to put me back in prison. and I had to make arrangements because I wasn't going back to prison. I think that's pretty clear. That's why I didn't make parole on my first bid, because I wasn't reporting to a parole officer. I'm like, feet don't fail me now. Knees move for me. So
a lot of us, myself included, always wonder if we had that option, if we were facing something like that, what would we do? And so it's good to hear that clarity coming from you, knowing that.
Well, I had that was a challenge. I got to admit it was a challenge, because being in the party and having political obligations and organizational obligations before I went in meant that a lot of people who worked and struggled to free political prisoners, who supported me when nobody else did over all of those years, I felt kind of, I had to make a decision, what I was going to do. And I had to consider that, I had to consider what my struggle would mean, not just for me personally and my personal freedom, but what it would mean to our movement and to our people that had faith and believed in our struggle, and by extension believed in me. I don't think that I was the personification of our struggle or anything of that nature, but I did feel somewhat of Fred Bennett. That's another story. Anyway, So when I went to DC, I went to see him because he was in exile, and to get a little, some insight. And we sat down and talked for 2 days. But the good thing about DC, he's a good storyteller.
Clearly.
And, he's a good storyteller. And so I sat down with DC at his spot, and he, first of all, he told me the story about his asylum when he left from Algiers, when he came to France, and when he moved to this particular area. He has this nice stone house at the edge of this village. I said, man, this is slick, DC. He built this by hand. He built this. It used to be the garbage dump for the village.
Oh, damn.
And he said when he came there, he started camping out with a tent and everything right outside the village, in between the village and the garbage dump. And gradually the people there he started relating to him and all of this stuff. And they gave him this plot. I don't know how he got it. I don't even know if it's in the book how he got it, or if he
I haven't got there. I haven't seen that part yet, so I don't know.
But he told me the story and how he made this nice 2-story house, stone. And it was slick. It was slick. So I said, damn, DC, man, you living large over here, man. He said, man, he told me the story, what it went through. But then he started telling me about, we started talking about the split. And the reason why DC had to split was not so, there were charges, that were pending and stuff like that, because DC did run the underground in the Bay Area. And I got to admit, when I first joined the party and went out to the Bay Area, I was impressed. These brothers had San Francisco, Fillmore. The Black Panther Party had Fillmore locked down, literally locked down. The police were under surveillance in Fillmore. You had Panther, because the Panthers they have relationships to the masses, to the people. So there were Panther observation posts in people's apartments. There were Panther pads all over Fillmore. You see there were Panther patrols in Fillmore. And in fact, that's where Eldridge left from Exile. He didn't have no passport, When Eldridge left, he left from their house in Fillmore. I was there when he left, and because a lot of us were summoned to California when Eldridge was supposed to report to jail, and he didn't. And we knew that there would probably be some repercussions for him not reporting, whether they were going to raid offices, whether they were going to raid people's houses. So what we did is we put up a massive campaign in Fillmore saying Eldridge is welcome here, had posters in the window. You know how back in World War II they used to hang a star in the window with a little light to say that they had soldiers, they had their child or their son or their brother was on the front lines, right? Well, we did the same thing with the Black Panther Party and our exiles. We put a panther, a rampant panther, on a blue poster with Eldridge is welcome here. We put them all over Fillmore. So the police had a kind of a problem on whether they really wanted to conduct a raid on some of these places and lead to a confrontation, and or whether they should try to suss this out and be more specific. But Eldridge was gone, and he first went to Cuba, and and so Eldridge was gone, and after Eldridge left, of course, Kwame Ture was next, and the counterintelligence program talked about. We got the documents on how they wanted to exacerbate the contradictions between Imam Jamil Al-Amin, who then and Kwame Ture, both who came out of SNCC. And I think you saw that documentary where I think it was Huey's birthday party in Oakland. And you have James Foreman on the stage. You have Kwame Ture on the stage. You have H. Rat Brown or Imam Jamil on the stage, Bobby Seale. And it was Huey's birthday party in Oakland. It's on YouTube probably. And it was at that time that they started to try to divide the party based on the contradictions with SNCC. The SNCC people, because SNCC at that time is also divided around the same time. They changed their name, in fact, from the Student Nonviolent Organizing Committee to the Student National Organizing Committee. You see, and people, I don't know if many people know that, but the reason why they changed their name is because they eschewed nonviolence. They believed they had the same agenda as the Black Panther Party, except they were more extensively organized in the South. Many of their cadre, that's why I was telling you about doing an interview with Major Jackson around this, besides the fact that Afeni resided with her for some time. She could talk a lot about how the founding members of the Black Panther Party in New York, many of them came out of SNCC, you see, which presented a dilemma for the NYPD who were infiltrating the other party, because some of the folks that came out of SNCC were educators, some were even working for the state in their job, but their politics was different. Some of them were educators, students, you see. It wasn't the lumpen proletariat out of the hood no more, just that. You see what I'm saying? So when the 21 came about, it came about, first of all, because when Eldridge had to leave, and I was on the West Coast, myself and Judon Ford, who was then the Deputy Minister of Defense, the new Deputy Minister of Defense for the new chapter of the Black Panther Party in New York, we were just breaking off into branches. We were going to PE classes at LIU, Long Island University in Brooklyn. And then we were basically told to go back to our neighborhoods and organize your chapter. After several weeks of PE, signing the necessary forms, getting, background checks, all that stuff, right? And when we got up to Harlem, we started organizing the party up there. It was around the same time that the split jumped off in SNCC. And the FBI got wind of some of the tension between Stokely and Rapp with David and Huey and them on the West Coast. Just some tensions. And when I talked to Kwame Ture, when I talked to him later on, when we both were in Africa, he explained to me what those contradictions were. But what the point I wanted to get at was that the FBI, when you go to their files, they put a snitch jacket on Kwame Ture. And they put a snitch jacket on him with the Central Committee. Same stuff they did later on with the Panther 21 committee. With the Panther 21. You know how they went after Set and myself, and they felt that it was necessary to eliminate us. You know, and now when I say they, I mean specifically David Hilliard and Huey. They felt that. And that was because of the counterintelligence program saying you basically was going to do something to them. And so when I last seen Kwame in the U.S., he was going to Cuba. He was saying, like, people don't know I'm leaving in the morning. I'm sliding on out. I'm going to Philly and blah, 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 blah. And we had a meeting, and David Brothers, the deputy chairman, same brother I told you that got his briefcase stolen. We had a meeting. And
I don't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to show what we showed last time. One of the documents where the FBI is talking about sending false letters to Huey, threatening his life to promote dissension and distrust between Huey Newton and Eldridge Cleaver, just as an example of what you were talking about. And folks can check the last episode of this series of discussions for where we went through more of these documents. But forgive that interruption. I just wanted to show that real quick.
No, I'm glad you did. I mean, there's more documents like that to get more specific. And I think I talked to Kalanji and you, and I think that aside from Afeni, aside from this movie, we might want to go down that path and deal with stealth history and how it resulted in the type of people we have today that claim to be activists, you know, who feel that the largest from foundations and grant money is the way to go, you know. And I mean, I've even seen essays and analysis showing that they're saying that the Panthers did it. I mean, I never knew of the Black Panther Party taking grant money. You see what? So
well,
I mean,
there's that broad. I've seen, not so specific to the grant money, but the broad line has been that the Panthers did take money from whites. So I think in some spaces people extrapolate from that to mean that it then is no different from getting bigger money from a foundation. But the question for me is almost is generally or always. Usually, if not always, what is the difference between what whoever I'm talking to or about is doing and the Panthers were doing? And that's where I think the key differences are, aside from where the money comes from and how much and what would be expected of it. And would you get it again if you were doing anything that was, you know, as meaningful as I think some of the activities you and others were engaged in. So, but anyway.
Well, you know, we had black nationalists back then who were wearing dashikis and afros and had the sisters walking 3 steps behind them. You know, they was on and speaking Swahili and all of this stuff. We called them pork chop nationalists back then, you know, and they weren't going to bust a grape with high heel shoes on. So in a fruit fight. So you know, you had this persona. You know, and so one of the things that the party did was, I mean, you know, we used to jack up white folks. I mean, how you think where the food came from in the breakfast program? You think Dairy Lee gave us the milk? You think Kellogg's gave us the cornflakes? You think we had free range chicken farm that gave us the eggs? Nah. We went to the grocery stores that were run by these crackers in the black communities, the Safeways, and say, look, man, you know, we got a little breakfast program down there in the church and Reverend so-and-so's church. And if you could donate some food, bulk stuff. If you could donate some, that's cool. And we put you in the Panther newspaper, and if you're a supporter of the community. And if you don't, then we'll turn your spot to driftwood. But the government, the FBI said that that's what we were doing. What was that, blackmail or coercion? What was that? What they call that? They call it something.
That sounds like it right there.
But no, seriously, most of the money that the Black Panther Party operated off of was the Black Panther Party newspaper, which sold tens of thousands of copies every week at 25 cents, or was it 50 cents? It might have been 50 cents, at 50 cents a hit. So every chapter had a quota of papers that it had to sell, and the large percentage, I think it was 2/3 of the money or something of that nature, was sent back to the Central Committee to reprint the newspaper, get articles. Everybody had to send articles in from their struggles in their local communities. We would edit the articles, look over the articles, put them in the Panther newspaper. Some newspaper would have a feature on the front, depending on where the struggle was at that time and what was the major contradiction that was presenting itself at that time. So that was the major source of money, was the Black Panther Party Community News Service. And the second major source of money was of course, the white left. You got to remember that when Eldridge Cleaver came to New York, he came with the Peace and Freedom Party. He was running on the ticket of the Peace and Freedom Party as a progressive alternative to the Democratic and Republican Party. How familiar does that sound today? Huh? Because back then, the Black Panther Party understood, and progressives and revolutionaries understood that unless we had a united front, unless we had alliances with other oppressed people, and you do know that the Black Panther Party did have a working class analysis. So therefore, we understood what white folks were on the right side of the barricade, you see. And they were, and those leftists in those days, they contributed. They contributed money, and not nickels and dimes and $10. They helped fundraise, and they gave events, and they invited us to speak, and gave money to the party. I never got any money for speaking for the Black Panther Party. All the money went to the party. You see what I'm saying? All the expenses was paid for by the host and all of these things. So we never got grant money in that sense. We function on what we call juche. Juche is a term, a North Korean term that means take what you got in order to get what you need. And the North Koreans have been exceptionally adroit at doing that. They'll take an aircraft and de-engineer it and take it apart backwards and then put it back together so they can see how it works, and then they'll make their own. You see, something that I think Black folks need to get an understanding. We could have our own F-15 fighter jets. What happened to the Tuskegee? I'm tripping.
Can you see Dhoruba trying to take off from anywhere in an F-15? Are you serious?
Oh, listen, you know I got pilot training, right? You laughing.
I'm not doubting that you could do it or that it should even be done. I'm just tripping at the idea because I'm just imagining everybody
me on Top Gun,
chasing you down. Tom Cruise chasing Dhoruba. That's why they don't identify who he's chasing in them movies. They want you to think it's Iran. They really think it's Dhoruba.
Did you see in that documentary that you were talking about, Theaters of War?
Oh,
and they
man.
talked about how Top Gun, how the new Top Gun update recruitment.
Oh,
I mean, they had like a bum rush the recruitment for the military.
Oh yeah, and that, of course.
And that shows you that you got a lot of young white youth, because you don't have any active outright war like Afghanistan right now, and because of the situation of the empire, a lot of the young Black people, a lot of the young white kids, what they call them, Generation Z now, Is it Z?
I'm not sure where we are, but Z, I think.
Is it X?
Honestly, I'm like,
X is O. X is O, right?
no, I'm X. I'm
You're
50.
X.
Yeah, I'm so it's Z. Then
So-
I don't remember what it was. The millennials, then Generation Z. Where are
No,
we?
Generation Z is after the millennium.
I know. I'm just saying. Is that where we are? Then I guess that's where we are.
I think so. I think we are Generation Z.
All right.
And
then what's next? They're gonna flip it. Yeah, I was just about to ask this. Are they about to flip it
You
over?
know
The
what's
next one's
next.
about to be A.
No, you know what's next.
What is it?
Zero.
Oh, meaning what? None. It's over.
Zero is it's a wrap. It's zero. It's got to be zero. I mean, we understand how zero got into the Western mathematics. It came from Islam. It came from Muslims. The replacement of the space with a zero.
I don't want to start any trouble, especially with you, but there are arguments for that having come out of actually Kemet beforehand.
Well, you ain't get no argument out of me about that.
But
I'm still trying to figure out how they built the pyramids. So you ain't gonna get no argument out of me about that.
Well, no, they moved on. They said it's the aliens now. The Transformers did it. That's all. Anyway, I'm just messing with. I mean, I'm not messing with. But I don't mean to stop you. But go ahead. The zero.
No, so I'm saying where were we?
Zero in Islam, and then the next generation being zero because it's over.
Yeah, because and this is the importance of stealth history. Because each generation, as the introduction in Wretched of the Earth says, each generation has to find its own meaning and its own destiny and either live up to it or betray it. I think we are in the process of betrayal. I think we have a generation that has betrayed any type of radical history, any type of radical tradition, and they have opted instead for the process of struggling within the paradigm of white supremacy and capitalism as if it can be reformed, reconfigured to consider their humanity, to advocate for their empowerment. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And all those who are pursuing that delusion, they're dreaming out of season. And that's really important. Because you have look at all the folks that supported Black Lives Matter when I was talking about it was just a hashtag movement, remember? I said it was a hashtag movement. And the Black lives ain't never mattered in America. So what are you saying, Black lives? What you telling your oppressor who murdered and killed you and enslaved you and it still maintains you in a condition of servitude and oppression, and you yelling with his neck in your neck, if you still could talk, that my life matters? He don't give a. He don't care about your life. It's a question of mind over matter. White folks don't mind, black folks don't matter. So it's clear. So when you use the term Black Lives Matter, you left yourself wide open. Because now white folks are going to say white lives matter. Police going to say police lives matter. Everybody's life matters. And as a humanitarian, I agree with that. However, if you're leading a movement, and one of the things that you noticed about the Black Panther Party, we never used the slogan that the enemy could co-opt. We never used the term that the enemy could co-opt. When we said power to the people, what was the police going to say? Power to the police, off the pig. And we defined the pig of having different species. There was the avaricious landlord, who was a pig. There was the capitalist banker, who was a pig. There was the police, armed agents of the state in blue costumes, who are pigs. You see, so we said off the pig. So what was the police going to say? What was the enemy going to say?
But Dhoruba, you're missing at least one major factor here. If all you have to do is look it up. There are no $50,000 speaker fees for unco-optable slogans. So.
Well, you know that Frederica Newton copyrighted the Black Panther Party's name and attempted to copyright power to the people. You see, would have copyrighted off the pig, but Emory wasn't having it. because of the cartoons that he had done. Yeah. So absolutely. Of course, I would love a confrontation with Frederica Newton in the court, because I'm going to use power to the people in the beginning of my book, in the middle of my book, at the end of my book. I might use the title of my book. Sue my ass. Yeah, I'm looking forward to something like that.
Oh my God. I definitely got 5 on your defense fund. I would, and I will be in the courtroom for that. Yeah, absolutely. I will be in the courtroom every day. That would be, oh my God, that would be must-see TV. But listen, real quick.
Because because with the party we used slogans that reflected the mass line, like I said before. And the mass line always was about the people, their needs, the major contradiction that the people faced, in whatever area that we were dealing with. So we had to sit down and think about slogans. You see what I'm saying? And put them in the newspaper, make them common. And we even had discipline in the party, that when we went to a rally or we did anything, these were the slogans that we were going to popularize. And the Panther that didn't do it, get some discipline. And so we were very conscious of using slogans. And we got that, of course, because we studied movements. We studied revolutionary socialist movements. Of course, we were avid readers of Mao Zedong. The Red Book was like our handbook. But the main thing that the first cadre in the Black Panther Party, the leadership in the Black Panther Party, we read different types of books. I mean, not different types, more advanced, developed analysis, like Mao Zedong's Protracted War, which is, I don't know how many volumes that is. But Mao talks about how he dealt with rebel bandits, how he dealt with people that were terrorizing the masses, roving rebel bandits, which would be our equivalent of street gangs, how he dealt with that. And in many ways, people don't understand that, even with Fred Hampton, the way he approached Jeff Fort and the gangs in Chicago, came straight out of Protracted War. You see what I'm saying? And Jeff Ford had to cop to it. Yeah, these crackers are trying to pit us against each other, man. And so the egos went out the window.
So let me jump in right there to ask this next question, because it's because when I was reading that Donald Cox chapter, I got to just some self-criticism here. I got to be honest. Like when Kathleen Cleaver some years ago told me, when I forgot where I was and who I was talking to, and I made a positive reference to Huey, and she checked me, and then she said, "Because you drank the Kool-Aid." Mm-hmm. I think willfully, probably, or unconsciously, maybe willfully, avoided a direct focus on the criticisms of his behavior, because I'm more interested in the ideas. I'm more interested in some of the more objective approaches that you even brought to the discussion of Huey. But when I read when I read that Donald Cox article, it's very difficult, to the extent that it's accurate. It's very difficult to be like, man, I mean, so my first question selfishly is, what are we supposed to do with Huey and his analysis and his work? So that's one broader question. Specifically, I do, and I agree, and I appreciate with the patience of skeptical Mantis here, who's been attempted to get this question asked and even super chatted it. So specifically, what do we do with his theory of intercommunalism, especially for those of us like myself who really appreciate it? So what do you think of the theory separately? And then what do you think of again, I think you've spoken to this a little bit, but I would be interested in a little more on what you think we should do in response to the criticisms we read of Huey today.
Well, intercommunalism is something that Huey developed and evolved as when the party began to move to the right. You see, people think that the split in the party was about egos and Huey and Eldridge, and it was all about that. It was political. in its essence, it might have had subjective overtones. It might have looked as if and plus, it was kind of like done in public, like on a prime time TV show.
I mean, when Cox recounts that from the perspective of people watching that in Algiers, I was like, whoa. Anyway, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I mean,
Please.
yeah. I mean, that's where they had to watch this shit from, Algiers, And but where did I watch it from? You see what I'm saying? How did we see it? You got to remember that. And like I said, we're gonna try to do this show in a week or so, where we have the documents. I'm gonna try to get Bob, because he did, he's a lawyer, so he did everything chronologically as we did it in the case. And so the documents to say this, he produced them, and then he goes in to say this is what the objective was, and then he produced those documents. Those are things we could spin off of because they're factual.
Oh, that's going to happen here next week.
Hopefully, you and Kalanji and folks.
Let's go.
I just talked to Kalanji a couple of hours ago, and he was inspired by it. I said, "Well, you're gonna call Jay." I think he called Bob already, and I think you already have the overview thing that Bob sent you, so we could work from there. But I told him that I think that what y'all should do, Black Power Media, is that we should deconstruct stealth history this way, using that.
Boom.
You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Because
let's go.
Because the leadership, the people that we have now, who have built all these organizations off of a false historical understanding of radicalism. I mean, look how many spin-offs you had from the Black Panther Party in the past 20 years. I mean, you can't even, I don't think you got enough room on your screen to list them. You got Black Mainframe, New Black Panther Party, Black, everybody. But so you ask yourself, if they really wanted to create or continue the radical history, the radical tradition that the party had, of course, our analysis was limited to the time in many ways, limited to the conditions of the time. Those conditions are different today. So a new party, a new organization, a third party would have to take into consideration the process of those differences from now into today and incorporate them in their mass line and in their organization and in their united fronts, whatever, you see? And I think that's not possible because this generation, Z, X, whatever you want to call it, they don't even know what went down. You see what I'm saying? And if they do want to find out what went down, they're going to read a Fainee's book. They're going to read, what's that person's name?
Message.
Elaine Brown. They're going to read, no.
That's my point. Yes. Thank you for saying that's exactly what my point is.
I mean, you got to ask yourself, who would name a book A Taste of Power? What power? What power was she tasting? Huh? Black Panther Party ain't had no power. And the Black Panther Party believed that a political power grew out the barrel of a gun, which it does. Don't make like that ain't true. Don't make like Mao was lying. Because the armed agents of the state in blue are the domestic enforcers of U.S. policy and laws, and they carry guns. And the U.S. military is down for full spectrum control of the globe. They got guns and bombs and all of that stuff. Now, if they didn't have those guns and bombs, they wouldn't stand a chance against us. They wouldn't. We could finish them off in a day, maybe two. You see? But it's men with guns, and this is one of the things I always rant and rave here in Africa. I hate I hate men with guns. I know that sounds crazy coming from me, but it enrages me when I see what men with guns do here. And these are ignorant people with guns. Some of them are poorly educated, and they got some knucklehead that got educated in the UK, and he's the governor of a district, you understand, and the people are suffering in this district. Who gets beat down, they get murdered, they get raped by these assholes with guns. You see? So political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Whether you want to believe it or not, that's a fact. And war is the continuation of politics by violent means. And politics is the continuation of war by non-violent means. So when Huey articulated something as simple in the beginning, in his definition of power, what did Huey say power was? Power was the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired fashion. Okay? So how do we arrive at intercommunalism? Intercommunalism came with survival pending revolution. I mean, this was all part of, this is why he came to the East Coast to talk about the new profile of the Black Panther Party. You see? They were moving to the right. And Huey was moving to the right because they wanted to survive. You see? They wanted to survive. And he had the wherewithal, I think, in the Oakland and Bay Area to believe that. You know, we had BGF soldiers coming out, going straight to lampposts, going straight to Huey, you know, who were organized by George in the prison before he was killed. You see what I'm saying? And they were used. Faye Stender was the name of the woman that was the white lawyer that was killed on the West Coast. And Fred Bennett, who someone put in the notes, I think it was Kalonji, put in the notes, was also murdered as a result of internecine conflict on the West Coast.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
I thought Faye was killed later because in that Bennett was part of was killed as part of the split. And
Bennett was killed long before. Yeah, absolutely. You're right.
Okay.
Bennett was killed long before, but he was killed for a different reason. You see?
Okay.
You know, so yeah, he was killed long before. And he wasn't, and it wasn't, you know, BGF soldiers that had anything to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just saying that I just want to sum it up.
No,
communalism, the ideology, the idea of intercommunalism was to take off on the concept of a united front and alliances, you know, between communities, okay, and the Rainbow Coalition and all that stuff, was to take off on that and move it in a rightward direction instead of in a revolutionary direction. I mean, that's my opinion, that it was really, I mean, when I talked to some of my comrades from Blau, they're still alive, you know, we all understood that the party was moving to the right at that time. And Eldridge, an enemy knew that, the FBI knew that. And so I think that it was very necessary to come up with concepts and ideas that would discredit the concept and the idea of armed self-defense, of retaliation for police murder and brutality. You know, we didn't get mad, we got even. And that's how I always grew up. You don't get mad, you get even. You know, and I mean, you know, when we look at the term intercommunalism in that context, we see that Huey and those folks on the West Coast, they wanted to survive and keep their game and keep their thing going, you know, and so they moved to the right. And they had to disassociate themselves from people like Geronimo. They had to disassociate themselves from people like myself and Eldridge, who they could then lump into the category. We were just, you know, on some macho trips, we were just on some gun stuff, or, you know, all of that negative stuff that one would put with adventurism and nihilism. You know, we were just adventurous. We were just, you know, rebel bandits, basically. You see what I'm saying? So that's how the COINTELPRO program split the party along ideological lines because the people on the West Coast wanted to survive. not survive pending revolution, survive so that they could be in positions of reactionary local power and control. That's why Elaine ran for political office with Bobby. Bobby put on a tie and suit, and they ran for office and lost. You see, and they thought that their control of the hood, their control and the respect that the party had in California and all of that stuff would transcend to Elaine Brown and the party after 1971, and it wouldn't. It couldn't. The party was dead in after 1971. What you had after 1971 was the machination of the party, a continuation of the party in name only. And their whole ideology was about intercommunalism and survival pending revolution.
So
that was right.
I get, especially from our last discussion where you break down more clearly your point about survival pending revolution being a conservative move, and I get the context you're describing, but on its own, when I read intercommunalism, when I read Huey talking about intercommunalism, to me, it does not, I don't get at all any rightward conservatism. I get a logical analysis of the situation and a call for a revolutionary internationalist movement. And what I remember specifically that he said there was that there are no nations to which we can decolonize at this point. Those traditional nationalisms don't exist or never existed, or they're not conditions to which we can return. And the other was that media can communicate, imperial media can communicate cross borders, destroying any concept of nationalism in a geographic sense. And therefore, we have to have a movement where the world's
You just did a program on the media and its global impact. The media can go across national lines,
right,
and influence the struggles, but that had long been the case in what I call New Age imperialism at the height of the Cold War. At the end of the Cold War, we see that the ruling elites around the world have come together in a transnational global cabal. That's what Davos is about. Remember I told you that I was writing this piece and I segued and I went into questioning nationalism as being a valid ideological or perspective to promote liberation in the age of instant communications in the global village. The nationalism is obsolete. It could be obsolete. Do we look at it that way? So in that sense, you could say that intercommunalism, that Huey was ahead of his time, if you want to look at it that way. Okay, if you want to look at it that way. But intercommunalism was written after the call for a united front against fascism. What happened to that? The United Front Against Fascism strategically was to bring together progressive and leftist movements to understand that in the United States, at that particular point in time, I think it was 1970, at that particular point in time, that finance capital in the United States, that there was a conservative white supremacist move to consolidate police power, militarized police power, the rise, the renewal of fascism under a different guise. It's what I call democratic fascism today. What I call the democratic fascism of the Western national security states. Okay, so Huey, when he talked about intercommunalism, he did presage or envision a future in which national elites would be global in their interests, in their coordination, and in their work. And we see that at Davos. Okay, so there's no more elite capitalists in New York who have contrary interests to elite capitalists in London. They all got the same interests. Now, back in the old days, London would have looked out for the British Empire and Americans would have did their thing. But this ain't the old days. This is post-Cold War. This is the rise of the global village. This is instant communications. Perception is reality. So you do have the ability to manipulate movements across national lines, but you do not have the capacity to organize movements amongst people in individual nations based on that. I mean, look at Sudan. It's not even a civil war. It's two knuckleheads trying to control what? The armed agency of the state. And who's behind them? Abu Dhabi, Arabs in Egypt are behind the former Janjaweed, who are now the revolutionary mobile, whatever they call their asses now. They're reactionaries, you see. Meanwhile, the masses of people who rose up to overthrow Bashir and hopefully usher in a new age, they like silent. They're just getting killed in the crossfire. There's no movement there. You see. On the other hand, how many times have we been told, like in the what they call it, the Arab Spring? How many times we were told when the Arab Spring was jumping off that these rallies, these massive rallies, were happening because of the internet? That these activists, these new young activists, were communicating across areas on the internet, and they would all meet at so-and-so Tahrir Square and demonstrate. And so what do governments do now when the masses start to organize? Cut off the internet. That's the first thing they do, is cut off the internet. So where does intercommunalism fit into the global village? I think that's a question we need to answer, because empire, in my estimation, is no longer about having troops in a particular place representing the mother country. Empire now is what I call New Age imperialism. You see, we have elites in Nigeria. We have permanent elites in various areas who are wedded, who have a symbiotic relationship with white supremacy, the European nation state. Who trained all of these coup makers? Where did they get their training from? The British, the French, and the Americans. You see what I'm saying? And the British and the French and the Americans think that if a coup jumps off in Nigeria, or if a coup jumps off over here, if they know the coup makers because they trained them, they feel they might have a little more leverage with the coup. And most of these young brothers who are coming up, a lot of these young brothers here in Africa, they have massive support. They have the support of young people for a while, at least. Okay, so let's talk about moving back to democracy, and the AU is not going to recognize a government unless they, have democratic elections. They've been saying that all the time. Ain't nothing happened. Okay, we need to understand that these young brothers and sisters who have carried out these coups, they see the corruption of their political elite, and they feel that they could make a difference and everything. But they feel because they have control, they can make things go their way, and it's not going to happen like that, unfortunately. So what's going to happen is that you're going to have situations like Mali or Somalia. Look at Djibouti. Djibouti doesn't have any other purpose on the planet but to house military bases. Damn near every country got a base in Djibouti. Even the Japanese got a base in Djibouti. The Japanese.
I don't know why I think that's funny, man. It's just the way you say it. Oh man.
The sons and daughters of Nippon, the Nipponese, they got a base in Djibouti. And the government's total income comes from the militaries of the world. Everybody got a base there. The U.S., the Russians got a base there. The Japanese. Who else? I mean, NATO got individual NATO nations. Italy got a base. Everybody got a base in Djibouti. And if we had a movement, we would have a base in Djibouti.
With you flying F-15s.
Yeah, that's right. If I had some of Jay-Z's money, we would have a base in Djibouti. If we had a serious movement, you understand, and cadres and shit, yeah, we could have a base in Djibouti. If we could have a consulate in Algeria, we could have a base in Djibouti. And we were recognized by the Algerian government. In fact, the Black Panther Party consulate in Algeria, the Panthers were the only ones that was walking around Algiers strapped down like they, strapped down. Was the Black Panther Party. International section. So I'm trying to say that intercommunalism, that question, I think that Huey, because I've always thought Huey was brilliant, no question. And so I think the intercommunalism presaged or envisioned a world where communities of oppressed people would have to interact with each other in a way that will empower these oppressed communities collectively, right. Which is basically a third political party that evolves into starts out as an abolitionist party and evolves into a revolutionary working class party.
But let me ask that second part of my question is also, so let's just say, and thank you for that answer and that discussion, but let's just say, for instance, for the sake of discussion, what if everything Huey argued in writing and in speeches that's left to us was 100% accurate? And then we read these histories as recounted by Cox and others about the split and everything else and whatever else. And to the extent that those subjective versions are correct, what would you suggest that those of us studying this history do in terms of, as I'm going to put it at least here, separating the behavior of an individual from the ideas that they promoted?
Well, I think this comes from the party tried to be a dialectical materialist, tried to use historical materialism as the basis for formulating its party line and its mass line, I think that what Huey's brilliance can be applied if we understand that at that time when the Black Panther Party came up, that the right wing in America, white supremacy in America, was at a very, very tenuous place. There was the war in Vietnam, which the U.S. was losing. There was the Cold War, which the U.S. was wasting tens of billions of dollars on, a useless war that nobody ever fought. Nobody, the Russians, the Soviet Union, the Americans never fought each other directly. It was always by proxy. The proxies were either in Africa or they were in Asia, but they were all proxies. You see? What happened in Indonesia with Sukarno, what happened in Ghana with Nkrumah, what happened with Sekou Touré, all of these things were a result of the Cold War. But what came out of the Cold War? The non-aligned movement. And the non-aligned movement in many ways could be seen as sort of like a template for Huey's idea of intercommunalism, because we always had solidarity with other people's struggles. The Black Panther Party was very emphatic about its solidarity. We had working committees with the Palestinians, with the PFLP and the PLO. I mean, I was on the liaison committee in New York with the Palestinians. And we had relationships with North Korea, with the Congo, and so we believed in international solidarity, and the Black Panther Party was a pattern. That's my puppy. You want to see it? Kimu. There's somebody outside, baby. He's 5 months old.
Right on.
You want to see him? Come on, man. You don't never jump up on me, because I train him not to jump up on me. But see, look. Look, camera. Yeah, you on camera, man. That's right. You got a black mug. Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty
He's
big
cool.
puppy, man.
5 months.
No.
Yeah. I got him from a comrade here. Anyway, so I'm saying that if you look at things, what Huey was talking about with intercommunal, and I don't want to keep going back over it because I'm just saying at the time that it occurred, it was a right wing. It was an attempt to move.
I think I see what you're saying. I see what
But
you're saying.
that doesn't mean that the analysis that went into it wasn't insightful enough to understand or take our practice of solidarity to a whole new level in order for them to survive. You see, but at that time,
But in the context of the split and the effort for a united coalition against fascism and all the other work that was happening, I see what I get your point. I get your point, and that's why the context is important. Yeah.
I think this is very important to understand that one of the major contributions of the Black Panther Party in terms of its radical impact was that it delayed the consolidation of the white supremacist national security state, this consolidation into what it is today. It delayed it by about 10 years. Think about it. Think about it. Think about how the NRA reacted when the Black Panther Party was on the set, how they had to deal with the idea of the Second Amendment. And then look what contrary that came out of the Black community during the war on drugs. Turn your guns in. Buy back guns. You see, all of these things. And in urban areas, in urban landscapes where the Black Panther Party was most effective, of course, that landscape is what led to the BLA. And the BLA had a fundamental principle: we don't get mad, we get even. Basically. You see what I'm saying? So the police, those armed agents of the state, knew that, we weren't about rallies, we weren't about none of that stuff. We were about resisting oppressors who killed and murdered us with impunity under the color of law. So in that sense, we were outlaws. And in that sense, I was born an outlaw. Black people were outlaws since we were brought here. We was outside the law. The law didn't apply to us. So what are we talking about here when we talk about something like a reform? How do you reform the white supremacist construct? How is that possible? How do we reform capitalism? How is that possible? When we know that capitalism, white supremacy, this dog is about to throw up. What is you throwing up? Hold on 1 second, please.
No problem. So while Dhoruba's dealing with that, I will take a quick second to thank Shiki Baby for the $25 super chat. Appreciate you. And I'll remind folks that super chats automatically become starred now and highlighted for us to see and put in a separate file for us, thanks to StreamYard. I did also want to take a quick minute to respond to this comment here, which I think is part of the problem with the criticism that we've gotten, or I've gotten from the beginning of this particular series with Dhoruba. YouTube academia, which I think is maybe an unintended pun. Y'all not talking about the subject, which is Tupac. Why not speak to the generation of Tupacs, the children post dismantling the Panthers? The generational divide is real. So this was sort of my point. From the beginning, I've been saying with this series with Dhoruba, who is not watching the series itself, my point has never been to talk about Tupac. It has been to talk about the politics that are briefly, passingly, and in passing mentioned in the series, referring to the Panther 21 and the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Movement more broadly, of which, as I keep saying, is my excuse to get Dhoruba back on to talk about all that he talks about. So we've been saying, I've been trying to be very clear that as it relates to this series, it's not intending that I'm not intending to disrespect Tupac, although I think the series does do that. I'm intending to revive, from my perspective, the appropriate discussion of the politics that this series only brings up as a pathway to talk about Tupac. And with all due respect, I don't think if there's a hierarchy of interests or needs, it's the liberation movement, the Panther, the BLA, the 21, the Panthers, and then Tupac. So that's always been my point. And I think those who have been critical of me in this particular series discussion are missing, as is YouTube academia, missing that fundamental point, which I've been clear about repeatedly and from the beginning. So in another discussion, we could talk about Pac. In another discussion, we could talk about the role and value of his life, as we have done here. That's not the purpose of this series. So I just want to be, again, very clear about that. And hopefully YouTube academia is still here to be paying enough attention to have gotten that. All right, Dhoruba, welcome back. Unfortunately, we do need to start to wrap up here. We're coming up on 2 hours. And I just wanted, but I actually have to start getting ready to take babies to places and stuff like that. So, as we wrap this version of the discussion, I'm happy to hear we're going to be having more soon come. Pick up where you left off, or whatever you would want to bring up. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I know you got to wrap up, but the sister just sent you a text saying that we are not talking about the subject.
Because their argument is that Pac himself is the subject, and I keep trying to remind everybody that's not our subject.
Pac is not the subject.
That's my point, right?
Pac is not the subject. He's the target, and he's the target precisely because of what that sister said about the generational divide. Y'all are goddamn clueless, and so you're using Tupac as your entree into being clueful of getting a clue, and Tupac was clueless. So. Because if he wasn't, he would have been on the West Coast with Suge Knight and got cracked that way. Okay, so now that there is a generational divide because ignorance is no longer bliss. Ignorance will get you killed. Back when I was growing up, ignorance was bliss. If you didn't know nothing, if you didn't know something, you just didn't know. It didn't really matter. Because it didn't bother you. Now what you don't know will get you killed. You see? And this generation is talking about there's a generational divide. These crackers will kill your ass. And if you on some academia stuff, they ain't got no problem killing academics. They ain't got no problem throwing your ass in prison. They ain't got no problem with that. If you don't believe me, just look around. You see? And so I'm saying Tupac was never the subject. Tupac was the target of that series. And, and because he was the target, you have to ask yourself, well, because Tupac had an impact on a whole entire generation that the enemy wants to make sure doesn't become revolutionary and doesn't even hint of resistance and struggle. That's why the foremost form of hip hop and rap is gangster rap. The foremost themes in hip hop. What's the foremost themes in hip hop today? How big your dick is, how much money I got in my bank account, how many Uzis I got in my back seat, and how you don't take no shit off nobody except the police, of course. But you throw your shit away when the cops come. You don't shoot back at them. They arrest your ass, you see. But let somebody from another neighborhood or another rap group say something bad about you. You ready to ride and die. You ready to go blow them away. But them crackers could kill your ass. They could come into your community and terrorize your mama, terrorize your family, strangle a black man in broad daylight in the middle of the street. Nobody would throw a brick at these cops. Not a brick. Do you know George Floyd would probably be alive today if somebody threw a rock at that cop and ran? Hit him in the head with a brick and ran? Just think about that. Just think about that. Pitfalls of spontaneous rebellion, my ass. You see? So I'm just saying that talking about we're not talking about the subject. What's the subject? The subject is stealth history. It's not Tupac. Tupac is a target. He's a means to get to that. You just did a whole program on theaters of war and how Hollywood collaborated with the military in order to present. How many cop shows do you have on TV, Jared?
Endless.
You can't even count them. And how many heroes and sheroes that we admire play cops? Do you think, and this is just throwing it out there, do you think if the subject of that movie, Tupac, was alive today, first of all, if he was alive today, you wouldn't have that movie. We could basically
it's the same. I think it's the same thing you once said of Malcolm X, that if he had been alive today, he'd be a political prisoner, and nobody would be talking about him.
Nobody would be talking about him. And but I'm saying if Tupac was alive today, would he be that example for that generation? Would he be that iconic figure for that generation? I don't think so. Everybody would have been talking about his sex life and what he did over here and the music that he made over there and how he was beefing with another rapper and they put out this song. That's all you'd be talking about. You wouldn't be talking about what is the politics and the existential and social ramifications of a generation that venerates an artist and don't understand that all art is political. There's no such thing as apolitical art. And Tupac, first and foremost, was an artist. You see. So when we talk about Du Bois, we talk about his writings, right? And we talk about his role at a particular point in history, and then we start to talk about maybe his conflicts with Robinson or maybe his conflicts with other. You see what I'm saying with Garvey, et cetera, et cetera. But that's all in the context of him being a seminal voice in the development of Black people's consciousness to this point. You see, and having some of the best writings on the planet about Black folks. Most insightful. Now, let's translate that to Tupac. What would his legacy be in terms of political consciousness of a generation?
So, but again, this is again where you and I disagree, I think, because my point is that I think, and this is what I was trying to say earlier, if the series had dived or taken more time, or if anybody takes more time, I think, to investigate that one thread. Now, I get Pac made a lot of mistakes. I'm not denying that. But that one line of he was looking to leave Death Row, leave Suge Knight, leave David Kenner, get away from that whole environment. Which to me, and other, what I said about Michael Tarif Warren, working with him and others, and just looking at some of his trajectory, I think he would have become increasingly politically radical. He would have suffered the consequences of that. And that is what I'm saying would have had him in however it would have worked out, his legacy would have been rebranded as he sat in a prison cell and would not have had the legacy and the importance to people in the community, just in the same way political prisoners have themselves been removed from having an appropriate impact on the community for which they gave up everything. So I don't know the details of how it would have worked out because it's obviously all speculation, but that's where I think it was clearly heading. And that's why I think so much is done in series like this to erase or suppress or diminish his ever increasing radicalism, and to only highlight, which is unfortunately necessary, his demise. And that's sort of how
I hear you, and as you pointed out, if he did take a more radical, or if he did develop radical or revolutionary or even abolitionist politics. He wouldn't have been allowed to be in the limelight and a star in Hollywood. And I mean, you think he was going to become a Denzel Washington or something?
No.
I mean,
I'm saying the opposite.
I'm not saying you. I'm not saying you personally.
Right. Yeah.
I was just using that rhetorically. I'm just saying that that I can understand how a generation will value an artist. I mean, it's like, or my generation valued Sam Cooke, or another generation, value Fats Waller, or whatever. You see what I'm saying? I'm saying all art is political. Okay? And if Tupac was an artist and this movie is supposed to highlight Tupac or supposed to deal with Tupac's artistry in his life, then it's going to have to say that Tupac's rap is political. And it doesn't say that.
No, and it can't. And this, just quickly, but this would be the point I'm getting at. So Big Teal is asking, what example would I provide that demonstrates Pac was becoming increasingly radical? So part of it would be the point I was getting at. Even the documentary acknowledges he was trying to get it to a position where he could break away from death row and get his masters back. It could easily, from my point of view, be argued that what he gave death row at the end of his life were the same kind of throwaway albums many artists have given to producers and record labels that would satisfy a contract and get them out to be free. He's not going to give death row whatever thoughtful music he might have been working on or other versions of himself. He would have given them all the gangster stuff and left it at that. That's one thing. The other thing specifically, I'm thinking of when Pac was doing work with trying to politicize and unify gangs, when he was talking about doing free shows in people's neighborhoods and taking the proceeds and redistributing it back into those neighborhoods. I mean, when I heard him saying that, I thought of that as a modern version of what King and others were once doing about collecting rents and having it go, instead of slumlords, back into the community. Just stuff like that. When he's raising questions about, without maybe even using the language, but he's raising questions about about capitalism and its interconnectedness to oppressive situations around the world. That's so. I'm just saying, and we have to remember he was still young, still coming out of prison, still caught up in celebrity in ways that I don't think he's given enough credit for having. It's not. That is an extremely difficult space, I think, to operate in. All of that, and the last thing I'll say, he's doing all of that in a moment of a nadir, or even after the full destruction of the last wave of revolutionary efforts. So he didn't have the context of any real organized movements around him. He had the dismantled remnants of a movement. And that's where I give him and my generation in general a little bit of room for the errors that we continue to make. But that's it. I'm gonna leave it there. Let me give you the last word, Dhoruba, for today, and then we got to wrap, and then we'll go. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't really disagree with that, with what you just said. I really can't find no disagreement with that. Although we are speculating about where he would become, but you indicated certain features, certain things that he was doing on before his demise, that seemed to indicate that if he would have had a little more room to grow, a little more opportunity, that, he might have been a progressive. But I'm saying again, even if that would have been the trajectory, he would have never made it to that end because you didn't have a movement to protect them in the first place.
Yeah. You
see what I'm saying? And they definitely wasn't going to put a revolutionary Tupac on the screen.
Oh, hell no. That's my point. That's why I keep saying I'm with you. I think he would have been a political prisoner and nobody would have been talking about him at all. But
yeah, or he would have been broke, or he would have been broke trying to get a deal, getting in beefs, trying to make a way and everything. I mean, you have how many? What was it I was going to tell you? You made a statement about what was it? You made a statement in the course of explaining Tupac, that I wanted to try to comment on so we could end. And I kind of like lost it, I think. But, I think that, yeah, if I think the Tupac, if he was the subject of this movie, he wasn't the subject of this movie, you understand, to show a generation what they lost, you see,
Right.
of this beautiful soul or the spirit or this artist that was taken away in such a tragic and useless fashion, because his death was tragic and totally unnecessary. It's these knuckleheads he was running with. You see what I'm saying? And the game that they was, and in fact, it's really sad because the knuckleheads he was running with winds up in his documentary.
And worse, knuckleheads he had nothing to do with, like Eminem, get to comment on his life. I mean, that shit was that was the most obvious.
Because the whole point was, because that verifies what I'm saying, that he wasn't the subject, he was the target. Because what's the purpose of Eminem? A white rapper who got some skills, you see what I'm saying? Was introduced by Dre. You understand? Who got some skills. And of course, any genre of black music has to have a white person that black folks accept as having soul. What did we say about the Righteous Brothers? What did we say? Every generation, what did we say about
I wasn't
Joe?
Ready for that reference.
What did we say about Joe Cocker?
Yeah.
You see? We could stretch it and go to Elvis.
Yeah.
So when I'm saying every time we've evolved a unique form of expression of our culture, we have cultural vultures that's going to come along and pimp that shit. And that's what I was trying to remember, the cultural vultures, which brings me to Jay-Z, you see, because I saw a clip where Jay-Z was in a meeting talking about how they wasn't going to stop him because they've always used negative terms towards black people.
Oh, and he said they want to call me a capitalist as if that's like they used to call me the N-word. Now they want to call me a capitalist. Like,
that is some whack shit there. That is the history of the N-word and the reality of capitalism. That's like putting the cart before the horse. You see what I'm saying? Primitive mercantilism, the primitive accumulation of capital that America got came from cotton, made the U.S. cotton king. Okay, put the U.S. on the map. Okay, and mercantilism at that time was agrarian, and it was the initial phases of capitalism. Had all of the features and everything. So if Jay-Z could say they used to call him nigger, and we know the evolution of that word and that term, and then he's going to compare that and say, well, they call me a capitalist, but I ain't gonna let that hold me back. I'm quite sure, what's his name? Soros. If you called him a capitalist, he might even argue with you. You see, and tell you that he's a born again. He's a neo-capitalist, so he's a new age capitalist. So he's not really a capitalist at all, because he doesn't believe that accumulation of wealth is somehow evil or somehow negative. You see.
But on that note, we do have to leave it there, because now you're talking trash about the man who is literally funding all of the revolutionary movements, and I can't have that, Dhoruba. So we gonna have to leave it there. You can't mess with the Soros money, my man.
I'm trying to get a plane ticket back to Babylon to deal with my cancer and stuff. So I'm saying to myself, man, maybe. If Soros is funding all of these people, I'm quite sure I can get some miles on Delta. Some miles on Delta. That way I can get a free ticket. Is it? So I mean, there's different ways to, to pimp, Mac or crack, pimp or die, So we went from revolutionary resistance to pimp or die, Mac or crack. You see, send me my money in a boat. You see, so yeah, I just want to say, closing, man. Yeah, I think that we really need to understand that movie. That's why I didn't want to watch it, because you see how we had a minimal amount of response regarding Pac as opposed to the conditions and the situations that he grew up in and what happened at that time. Right. And I think that was perfect. I think that was good, because if we would have just talked about Pac, we would have never gotten to any of this. I don't think. And if we did, people would have just, jumped on us. I mean, they jumped on us anyway. But you know me, I don't care. But people would, when we do this next series, I think it's more appropriate to talk about that and agent provocateurs. You understand?
Oh yeah, let's get it. Yeah, we can't start that now because unfortunately I do have to go. But Dhoruba, once again, thank you very much. This has been another great series of discussions. I can't wait for the next round, and definitely let us know about this. What help we could be with whatever you need, and as to you, we know this applies, and everyone else, peace. If you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. We'll catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like it throughout the BPM platform. Dhoruba, thanks once again. Take good care. Catch you next time. I mix what I like, what I like. Wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. But everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.